States president can be himself. They travel endless hours with trusted friends and advisors, and so they can't really keep their guard up for very long. So the people around them get to see them as they really are.
Veteran White House correspondent Kenneth Walsh today on Now I've Heard Everything. I'm Buell Thompson. Air Force One has been in the news a lot lately. A lot more than usual, as a matter of fact, largely because of that unusual gift from Qatar to be used as Air Force One by President Trump. Now, the history of a presidential aircraft, of an aircraft just for the president, goes back 80 years. And in fact, not all planes that have been known as Air Force One were jets, as you might imagine. Now, longtime White House correspondent Kenneth Walsh was one of those rare individuals outside the president's inner circle who got to ride on Air Force One many times. And his fascination not just with the aircraft, but with the men who have called it their office in the sky all these years. The result was Ken Walsh's book from 2003 called simply Air Force One. Now get ready to hear what the plane is, what the plane is not, what the public thinks it is, and what it is definitely not. In just a moment, my conversation with Ken Walsh.
Come back with us now as we relive a little piece of our cultural history on Now I've Heard Everything. This interview is from Bill Thompson's 30-year archive. Enjoy.
So here now from 2003, Kenneth Walsh.
I have been covering the White House for U.S. News and World Report since 1986, and over the years it became clear that there's a segment of presidential history that's sort of been unexplored, and that's what the presidents do on Air Force One. And it's so familiar to so many people, the airplane and its symbolism and so on. But what actually happens on the plane is what I was getting at. And I found that a lot of people, including the 5 of the 6 living presidents who I talked to, were just only too eager to talk about this. It's one of those wonderful topics for an author where just about everybody you want to talk to wants to talk to you.
Now, there are boundaries, aren't there? I mean, the Secret Service doesn't want you to talk about everything that goes on in Air Force One.
Exactly. There are the security questions that the Secret Service is very sensitive to, all the more so since September 11th, 2001. But I did discover some interesting facts about the security and about the history of security problems on Air Force One. It does have special security measures, as we might expect. It has these countermeasures, these devices that ward off or deflect incoming missiles if they're directed at the plane. They're located behind the engines because, in theory, any missile would be coming for the heat of the engines. There's also a special skin all through the around the aircraft that's designed to protect the communication system in case of a nuclear blast, to protect it from electromagnetic pulses. So there's that kind of thing. And, of course, there's these incredible security measures that are taken to protect the president. The Secret Service and the military have concentric circles around the president and the aircraft, the innermost circle being the most secure. That's the one that is very difficult to penetrate for anybody.
As it should be.
Absolutely.
As a citizen of the United States, I'm glad that it is difficult.
Right.
But now, there isn't just one Air Force One, is there?
No. Air Force One is the term used for any aircraft run by the Air Force that the president happens to be on. Now, most people think of Air Force One as the big 747, the big bubble-top jumbo jet. That's the plane the president travels on the most. But there are many other planes presidents travel on, and whenever he's on one, it's Air Force One. Now, if it's a Navy aircraft, as it was when President Bush flew on the aircraft carrier, it becomes Navy One. But that's rare. And Air Force One is this big, mostly thought of as the 747 that you see the president getting on and off all over the world.
I wonder if we would even know it as Air Force One if it weren't for John F. Kennedy.
Well, John F. Kennedy, of course, that was the single most dramatic and sad moment involving Air Force One was, of course, after President Kennedy was assassinated in 1963, and President Johnson was sworn in aboard Air Force One. There's that famous photograph of him with his right hand raised, taking the oath of office in that cramped and just supercharged presidential cabin with Jackie Kennedy on his left and Lady Bird Johnson, his wife, on his right. That's a picture that so many Americans remember, and that's the single most vivid moment I think people associate with Air Force One.
But it is seen as you say, you have wonderful pictures in here too. it's seen as it's not just a pretty backdrop. It's a great symbol of our country.
Right. It has become a symbol. I had a couple of polls conducted for my book, and it did come out, as you say, that Air Force One is a symbol of our power, our technological prowess, and a symbol of the presidency itself, not only in the United States but all over the world. And presidents consistently talk about how whenever they see the plane, they, as President Reagan said, swell with pride. President Bush talks about how early in his presidency he was on a trip to Montana, and he looked out the window of Air Force One, and he noticed a long line of cars snaking up to this little airport he was going to. And he asked one of the people with him, well, what's that all about? And they said, well, that's people just lining up just to see the plane. Sorry, Mr. President, it's not just you. And so from then on, he, in many of his arrivals, he will always say, I just arrived on Air Force One, because he knows the connection is so powerful to people.
Incredible. I'm guessing when you move into the White House, the president and the first lady, you're told, well, you can't remove that balustrade because Andrew Jackson put that in, and you can't do anything with the carpet in this room because that was what Teddy Roosevelt put in. Air Force One is a little bit, have a little bit more leeway to do what they want to do, don't they? They
do have more leeway. Just a little bit of the history of it. 60 years ago this year, Franklin Roosevelt became the first president to fly while in office, and he went on a secret mission to Casablanca to meet with Winston Churchill. He flew 42 hours each way. You can imagine how slow that plane was, and for a man with his legs paralyzed by polio, how difficult that trip must have been for Franklin Roosevelt. But he was a pragmatist, and he was an innovator, and so one of the premises of my book is that you learn a lot about these presidents by what they do on Air Force One and how they behave and operate on the plane. And we saw Roosevelt being an innovator and a pragmatist, also a very gregarious guy. On his way back, he turned 61, and his crew surprised him with a birthday cake. And of course, he insisted on carving it up and giving nice helpings to everybody on the plane. But he only flew twice more. Then he passed away, and Harry Truman came on as president. And to address your point about whether the presidents change aircraft, Harry Truman, unlike Roosevelt, wanted to be seen getting on and on the aircraft. He thought that would enhance his stature, and Roosevelt didn't think he needed any enhancement of his stature. So when Roosevelt passed away, Truman brought on a 4-engine prop plane that he called the Independence, and he actually had it painted to resemble an eagle with a beak and eyes and tail feathers. Now, that would be very gaudy and bizarre today, but Harry Truman wanted everybody to know that this was the president's plane, and he really did succeed.
Well, that's it kind of continues to this. I mean, you want people to know. I mean, there's no mistaking that this is anybody's plane other than the President of the United States of America.
Right, exactly. And those distinctive blue and white colors, nobody has sort of decided to change those. Jackie Kennedy figured out those colors and designed that color scheme at the behest of her husband, and everybody has liked it so much that they never have changed that beautiful color scheme. But that goes back to the 60s with Jackie Kennedy.
And now the atmosphere, as you were alluding to a moment ago, also changes from administration to administration on Air Force One.
Right, it does. And a good example is the atmosphere President Clinton created on the plane, which reflected him as a person, as a president. He worked hard on the plane, but he was a night owl, and long about mid-afternoon and into the evening, he would sort of come alive and come awake, and then he'd be up to all hours of the night, way into the early morning hours. His staff, one by one, would get exhausted as he'd tell stories. He'd want to play cards. He'd want to watch movies. He'd just want to sort of postulate on different things. So one by one, everyone would become exhausted until only Bill Clinton would be left standing, and he'd wander the plane looking for people to talk to. And sometimes he even came into the press compartment and found us, if some of us were awake in the press cabin. Now, President Bush today is a much more disciplined flyer. He is much more into the old school of being on time, which President Clinton almost never was on time, limiting his time on trips as much as he could, being very businesslike and having sort of office hours on the plane, and then private time. He's brought a treadmill, and he works out on the plane quite vigorously on long flights. And another interesting thing is, for a while there, President Bush was interested in the board game Risk. You remember that game?
Yes.
Where you amass armies and conquer the world? Well, he really got into that. Not so much to play, but he encouraged his staff to play, and then he would urge them to take the most risks, conquer the most territory. So they really got used to President Bush sort of pushing them farther than they wanted to go.
After this short break, Ken Walsh tells us what the press section on Air Force One is really like.
If you've ever wondered where to find the captivating books we discuss on Now I've Heard Everything, wonder no more.
Just tap the link in our show notes or visit our website, heardeverything.com.
Plus, when you purchase through our affiliate links, you're not only diving into great stories, but also supporting this podcast.
And we thank you for your support.
Now back to my 2003 conversation with Ken Walsh.
Now, all right. Now, what is the press section of the plane like? I mean, is it just like an ordinary jumbo jet?
No, it's not like an ordinary jumbo jet. It's pretty much business class seats, nice big roomy seats. But the main thing is that we're in a very small compartment with 12 seats in our own little bubble. We can't leave the compartment unless we get an escort, except there's a little restroom in the back, and then there's the galley in the very rear of the plane, and we're just in front of that, almost in the rear of the plane. So it's a very cloistered atmosphere. We can't wander around. We don't see anything but what's in that cabin, and we don't talk to anybody except for whoever comes into the cabin. And President Bush these days almost never comes back into the press cabin. He just does not want to be on camera or on the record, and a lot of the reporters refuse to agree to see the president off the record. So as a result, we don't see him on the plane. Now, he does a lot of things, and that's part of what the book is about.
But it occurred to me, a lot of people, up until the time they read this book, their only impressions of Air Force One might be maybe watching The West Wing, those couple of episodes there, which we're told is a reasonably accurate portrayal, or that Harrison Ford movie in which the whole plane blows up and he's hanging on for dear life and things like this. Right. I mean, and so people are imagining all sorts of wild things that may or may not actually be on the plane.
Right, yeah. Well, and for one thing, there's no escape pod. You remember in the Harrison Ford movie, there was an escape pod. Well, there is no escape pod, and it's the president's compartments and his quarters are actually quite luxurious and quite very special. If you look at the view of the plane that people are most familiar with as it lands from the side, in the nose of the plane, on the second level, the bottom level being where the cargo and the luggage is, on the second level, in the nose is the president's bedroom, and there's always there's two couches, one of which is always made up as a bed in case he wants to stretch out and take a nap. And it's about the size of a luxury suite in a fancy hotel. Behind that is a restroom complete with a shower, which is very, very handy for any president to have. And then there's a big office for the president with a big wraparound desk, and that's something that presidents really value. And that suite is, as I say, it's the bedroom, the restroom, and the office are quite big. Anybody in a luxury hotel will be happy to have those quarters. Then as you get farther back into the plane, you have staff conference rooms, staff seats, Secret Service, guests, and then media in steerage there in the back.
Where you guys belong.
That's right.
Now, I'm guessing you had to kind of walk a line with this book because it's not really a technical manual, and that wouldn't have been your intent. They wouldn't have let you do it anyway. But you also, you're talking, social, political, kind of, personality oriented with some technical details and some history. This is 3 or 4 different kinds of books in one.
It is. Well, I tried to address the aircraft themselves and going back to FDR. Going through when the jet was introduced in 1959 with Eisenhower, through Kennedy, and then up to today to President Bush. But more important, I tried to give a sense of what the 12 flying presidents have been like as people, as seen from their conduct and decisions and policies on the plane. And it is a very interesting insight into each of them because it's a place where they can create their own habitat. Each president can be himself. They travel endless hours with trusted friends and advisors, and so they can't really keep their guard up for very long. So the people around them get to see them as they really are, and I thought that was really one of the most interesting parts of the book.
Now, something that you alluded to a moment ago, post 9/11, does Air Force One take on an even greater responsibility, if you will, now in the fleet? Right.
Well, one thing that 9/11 showed is that Air Force One could be used as a very effective command center in an emergency. It had never been tested in this way before, as in a full-blown national emergency, where Air Force One was in the air for much of that horrible day, transferring the president from one secure location to another. And it had never been quite clear how this would work, but the communication systems worked very well, the security worked very well, and the president was able to reach whoever he needed through that day. And in fact, one question that a lot of the people familiar with Air Force One raise is, you remember this idea of the doomsday plane. There are two 747s that are used as Air Force One, but then there's a third 747 that's used. It was designed to transport the president in case of a nuclear war, to stay aloft, to be refueled, so he would always be safe. Air Force One can fulfill that mission today. So the question is whether they really need that third 747 that's known as the doomsday plane. On September 11th, the White House did consider putting President Bush on the doomsday plane, but in addition to realizing that Air Force One could fill that need, they thought, well, how would the country react if we put the president on something called the doomsday plane? Would there be panic? Would people think things were really getting completely out of control? So they didn't do it. And I think that's going to be a real precedent for the future.
There's a lot of capability in this aircraft.
Oh, absolutely. Well, that's one thing the presidents really value. They can fly from Washington all the way to Asia without stopping, which is something that they really, really value. And it really cuts down the travel time, but also the wear and tear on the presidents, and they really love that. And as I said, I've talked to 5 of the 6 living presidents, and they all just adore the plane. And I remember a remark that President Kennedy once made, and this was during the days of the 707, the smaller jet, and he said, well, people who write about and complain about the awesome burdens of the presidency, they never flew on Air Force One. And he really loves his plane, too.
Now you can get your copy of Ken Walsh's book, Air Force One, by tapping the link in our show notes, by clicking the link in the description below if you're watching this on YouTube, or by going to our website, heardeverything.com. We may earn an Amazon commission if you make a purchase. Heardeverything.com is where you can also find my 1987 conversation with someone else who's ridden the Air Force One a few times, longtime ABC TV correspondent Sam Donaldson.
You come to think of the television correspondent who's bringing you the bad news in someone's administration who you love as being an enemy, and then who brings you the good news if you hate that person as being a cheerleader for the team.
And my 1987 conversation with the man who served several presidents as the White House chef, Henry Haller.
The Carters only wanted desserts when they had guests, so did the Fords and the Nixons. President Johnson always wanted dessert, and also the Reagan family, they want dessert all the time.
And of course, we post new episodes of Now I've Heard Everything every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and you can find us wherever you find podcasts. And thank you so much for listening. Next time on Now I've Heard Everything, her mother was a national treasure, a legend in American newspaperdom. Millions of people read her columns every day, and you know the name Ann Landers. So next time we'll meet her only daughter, Margot Howard.
I understood that she was very culturally important to this country. She had a very healthy ego, but I'm not sure she understood the cultural force that she was the last half of the last century.
That's next time on Now I've Heard Everything. I'm Bill Thompson.